Hey everyone, it's your host Courtney Turek with Bold Moves, Confident Choices. We're here to talk about making fearless decisions and taking charge of your own path. So let's get real, get bold, and take charge of your future. Today's guest, Andrew DeGood, is an empathetic leader and builder of things that matter. He advocates to normalize bipolar and is a seasoned leader in the finance and technology industry. He's brought over 20 years of diverse experience as a founder and C-suite executive. His approach is rooted in strategic growth, innovation, and fostering a healthy workplace culture. So before diving into anything further, Andrew, welcome to Bold Moves and Confident Choices.
Thank you so much, Courtney. I'm so excited to be here.
We are so happy to have you. So before we jump into that big, bold move for you, I would love for you to share your story with our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to keep it as concise as possible. But so I was born in Clearwater, Florida. I was born on literally on a beach and spent kind of my early years in Clearwater. Like any good Gen Xer, I had parents who had a really ugly divorce. I feel like that's like a rite of passage for many of us Gen Xers.
I think you're right.
And so I lived in Clearwater until I was about 13, moved to Tampa later on to move in with my father. And I was what you would call a troubled youth. We'll get into it a little bit later on the bipolar, but which I would not find out for a long time that I was, but really started showing signs of it at age 7. And so fast forward to high school, I was asked to leave 2 different high schools in Tampa, which eventually led to me moving to boarding school in Northern California.
Wow.
Which ended up being an amazing time and space for me because it was this very psychologically safe environment, but only there for a couple of years, right? I then got ejected from that back into the real world. And unfortunately, they didn't really prepare us very well. So I went to the University of Kansas. I was in the engineering school to start off with, but would end up leaving the engineering school. And then eventually, by the end of my sophomore year in college, dropping out. College was just not for me. I still seemed to really kind of be struggling and not understanding why in life. So that would set off a series of what I would call early mini careers. I spent about 8 years in high-end restaurants as a food and beverage manager for a major hotel, was also a beverage director for several large or high-end restaurants, particularly in Kansas City. And then in the Northeast, I would actually move to the Northeast to do one of those. I left the restaurant industry because I knew I was getting to a point where I wanted to get married, have kids. I did everything from selling cars to selling furniture, just absolutely no idea where I was going to go. I was a completely lost late 20-something kid who was a college dropout. And I didn't have any skills, honestly, at that point in time, other than maybe talking. I don't know. And so I went to lunch. I'd moved back home to Tampa from the Northeast. Still really struggling to figure out where I was going. And I happened to have lunch with a friend who was talking all about this company that he was working for. And I was like, man, that sounds like that could be up for me. And this was in the mortgage boom of the early 2000s. And what he did and what I would go on to do for a while was mortgage-backed securities. And so what I did was he got me a user manual from his company. And at night, I was selling furniture during the day. And at night, I was studying these materials. David McCullough, great guy. He was the one who was helping me through all of this and letting me learn it. And then he created a fake resume for me. So they were hiring so quickly back then, like, and they just needed bodies, like people who could breathe, that they would hire anyone. And so I sent in this fake resume. They called me literally 5 minutes later, and they ask you a series of 10 questions. And if I could get 7 of the 10 right, then they would hire me on the spot.
Oh my God.
And sure enough, I got 10 out of 10. I was well prepared, and I got a job offer like literally that moment. And they were like, how soon can you be in Connecticut? And I was like,
Tomorrow.
Like, when do you want me? Right.
Right.
These people were going to pay me 3 times as much money as I had ever made. Right. So it was like, it wasn't huge money, but like it was
at the time, right?
Like at the time, it was massive. Right. So I was really, really fortunate. I would go on to have about 20-ish years or 18, 20 years of a really, really fortunate career. in that space. That would then move me out to Denver, where I did my first startup with other folks. I was not a founder, just an employee, but really got to see a company go from about 20 people to 600 over a span. I would go on to work for a few more companies, in both in the mortgage-backed securities world as well as the technology world. But I continued to struggle with my bipolar throughout that period. And in 2010, I was actually put on administrative leave without pay from a company because they just couldn't handle my outbursts during hypomanic episodes, which I didn't know what it was. I didn't understand why I had this feeling. I could almost watch myself from the outside going, why are you so pissed off? Like, why are you so high stress? And wanting it to go away, but not knowing why. And so one of the best things that ever happened was me being put on an administrative leave. I had just moved my wife at the time and my now 15-year-old, who was one. I don't even know if Caleb was one yet, all the way across the country to Colorado. And I'm the only person making money in the house. And so it was terrifying to be put on leave. And so I just started Googling like crazy, like trying to figure out what the heck's going on. Went to a psychiatrist and would quickly find out that I was bipolar 2, which is there are two variations of bipolar and bipolar 2. Bipolar 2 is a little bit more mild, but can last a little bit longer. And it's hypomanic episodes versus manic episodes in bipolar. The funny thing is I self-diagnosed. I literally found, like, I was Googling like all the problems with me, and like Google was like, you might be bipolar 2. And so I went to the psychiatrist and he was like, yeah, that checks. And he gave me a little blue pill and sent me on my way. And I would continue to take that little blue pill for the next, well, I still take it to this day, but I wasn't 100% healed. There were still some issues, if you will. It was just that like things got better, right? I always describe it to people. It's like everybody in the world was driving a Porsche 911 GT and I was like walking on the roadside and then somebody handed me a Honda Civic and I just thought, woo, not realizing that like I really wasn't quite at the same level as everybody else. So fast forward, like I mentioned, I'd done a few more companies. And then I was sitting in Newport Beach, California at the Newport Renaissance the night that Adam Silver canceled the NBA season because of COVID, which I still laugh that like the moment I decided that COVID was like a legit, like serious thing was because we couldn't play basketball anymore.
Right. Of course.
And so I would get on a plane the next morning and fly back to Indiana, of which I didn't really know anyone. I had gotten divorced a few years before that. And so it was me, my ex-wife, and my kids all here in Fort Wayne. I had been working in New York and California during that period. So it was a really, really bizarre experience to all of a sudden be back home, because I traveled like 40 weeks out of the year. So now all of a sudden back home, and I'm like, secondary markets had like completely shut down. Everybody thought the world was going to end. And the PE or private equity firm behind the company that I was with at the time said, we're going to basically let go of the majority of people because we just don't know what's going to happen and we're bleeding cash. And so we would part ways. That would have been, I think, about June of 2020. And that opened the door for my first company. Dear old friend and colleague, John Levinek, called me up and goes, let's start our own company. And I was like, you're crazy. I'm like, who is going to give us money to start a company in the middle of a worldwide pandemic where no one can leave their homes, basically, right? But sure enough, like, amazingly, with a 5-page PowerPoint and an Excel spreadsheet, we were able to start Canopy. And Canopy we were hyper focused on mental health and on corporate culture. It's still probably one of the things I'm the most proud about. 2022 would go on to be a difficult year for the markets and for us as a result. And so we made the decision at the end of 22 to sell the company, which I think everybody who knows me well knows, like, that's the last thing I ever wanted to do. But sometimes you have to make hard choices, and that was one. So I would leave that and kind of wander around. It's actually when I found the Outlier Project. It was New Year's Eve of 2022. That was when I met or learned about Scott McGregor and the Outlier Project, which would go on to have a huge impact on my life the last couple of years and all of the people who I've been able to meet from it. But I've always been fascinated by emerging tech. And so what I did is I really kind of dove straight into generative AI. That was 2022, the beginning of 2023 was really when it came onto the scene and sort of the darling technology. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to spend about 6 months with an AI startup out of Boston. And that was all I did. I basically eat, sleep, breathe AI. Unfortunately, that startup and I were just not a fit long term. And then fast forward to the beginning of this year, my now new co-founder, Tim Nguyen, had reached out to me. And actually, I had reached out to him to get our mutual friend, Lindsay Dowd, was doing some market research with CEOs. And after she spoke to him, Tim was like, hey, we need to catch up. And so he was like, hey, I want to start this new company. Do you want to co-found it with me? And I was like, maybe, because we didn't know each other that well. So I actually got on a plane the next week, flew to Southern California, went to his house. We did a strategy meeting for about 8 hours. I got to meet his kid, go to lunch with his wife. It was phenomenal. And we got to the end of the day and we were like, yeah, let's do this. And so that was what started the journey of Ask Bob AI, which is quite possibly one of the most ridiculous names ever for a company, but we love it because we get to create Simpsons characters for all of our different products. And we actually have our second product is going to be coming here about the next month called Betty. Of course, Betty is smarter than Bob. So Betty does some new things. So we're in the phase of actually not only building the product, but what I love doing is building out what is Betty's cartoon character going to end up looking like.
Oh my gosh. Okay, Andrew, there is so much here. And I'm trying to take notes as you're talking on things I just want to touch base on before we really talk about what that big, bold move was for you. So everybody knows, Andrew and I met through the Outlier Project, which is this tremendous community of a lot of like-minded individuals who are trying to elevate their game. I will tell you, we were together at a retreat a few weeks ago, and this is where I really got to know Andrew. And I walked away being like, this guy's amazing. I don't know if he knows how amazing he is. And he was a little guarded to me. Reason being, I'm a Hoosier, right? I'm from Indiana. And I kept giving him crap that he's a Hoosier. And he just, wow, he put the guard up and would say, I am not a Hoosier. You did not like that, did you? You didn't.
I don't claim Indiana. I don't. It's true.
Yeah. But that's what drew me to him, right? Because he lives in Indiana and I'm from Muncie, Indiana. So we're on this bike ride in between our breaks, and I'm talking to Andrew about what he does. And he goes on to share that he started this business during COVID, and he's just nonchalantly talking about it like it's no big deal. Well, Andrew, how many people did you provide jobs to during the pandemic?
So we were really, really fortunate. It started with two of us, just John and I. Our initial crew when we went live was 13 people. We would end up growing that over the next 5 months to 130 people. So we were adding almost, I think, about 30 people per month. Wow. It was right where we were at. And it was fantastic. It really was. I really missed that period of time for sure.
I mean, that's incredible. And I go back to your title on LinkedIn, empathetic builder of things that matter. And that is what you did during the pandemic. You helped so many people, Andrew. I really hope that you take a moment to embrace that part of your life and what you did for so many people during a really, really hard time.
I appreciate that. But honestly, what they gave me was over that journey was far more than I feel like I'll ever be able to repay.
Wow. True leader, Andrew DeGood, true leader. So the other thing that you mentioned is normalizing bipolar. It was a big part of your journey and your life and discovering that. Mm-hmm. So how do you try to continue to normalize bipolar for everyone and mental health?
Yeah, I mean, it's very simple. I just talk about it a lot.
There we go.
I'm very open about it. And as a matter of fact, I post today that was on that very topic. And it's really interesting because I have a lot of people who are very close to me, particularly my guys in Iron Tribe, which I didn't talk about that. We can talk about that a little bit as well. But who, whenever I say I'm bipolar, they're like, I always forget that you're bipolar. Right. And so that's a huge part of it is the majority of people with bipolar live in what we refer to as the BP closet because of fear of retribution. I get DMs all the time from people who are like, I'm having a hard time with my bipolar right now. And I want to be able to tell my employer, but I'm terrified of retribution. Even in 2024, this is a real thing. People are scared to check the box that they're disabled when applying for a job because technically people with bipolar, the government categorizes us as disabled.
Really?
I
I
really
didn't
hate
know
that
that.
word.
I
Really
did
hate
not know
that
that.
word.
Yeah.
So yeah, so for me, it's the biggest thing I can do is to continue to talk about it so that people see me, see how I operate in the world, and are like, oh, he seems totally normal. Well,
Yeah.
maybe not totally normal, but you
Well,
get my point.
oh, you're normal, Andrew. I'm just kidding. Hey, I've got a question for you. Want to make thousands more in your next salary negotiation? If you knew there was a proven system to help you land more money, better benefits, and a total compensation package that reflects your worth, would you take it? The Salary Bump Accelerator is that system. It's packed with everything you need to get out of your head, prepare for your interview like a pro, and negotiate with confidence so you never leave money on the table again. And because you're a loyal listener to Bold Moves Confident Choices, you get 15% off with code BOLD15. That is all caps BOLD15. Go to thesalarybump.com to get started because your next paycheck should be your best one yet. Let's get you paid what you're worth. Okay, so I could keep asking questions from your story, but I think it's really important for our listeners to understand what was the bold move or confident choice that took things in your life to that next level of you.
Yeah, so this is a really easy question for me. I know it without a doubt. There are a lot of huge moments that have occurred over my life, but in the first quarter of 2021, I had an employee who was super struggling. It was our best employee, just top numbers, like just brilliant mind, but they would just vanish for days at a time. And I couldn't figure out like what the problem was. And this individual, I was like, listen, I'm gonna have to let you go. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. And that was when they had the courage to tell me they were bipolar.
Ugh.
And it like hit me like a wave. Like, here I am. I didn't see it. I didn't see
Wow.
it. And
You're making me cry.
my
Keep going.
response was I chuckled a little bit, which is probably the worst response you can get. But it
Right,
was
that's
because
true.
I'm like, oh shit, dude. I'm like, I'm bipolar too as well. Right. And it was just this aha moment where he was like, what? He was like, I thought you have lived this gold paved life. And that was the image that everybody had of me because in 2010, when I got diagnosed, I told an HR leader, hey, I'm bipolar. And they said, don't ever tell anyone that again if you want to get ahead in life. And they were right. That was what the atmosphere was like. That was what life was like. So I had created this avatar, if you will, of Andrew, and everybody from the sidelines and the cheap seats were sort of like, dude, that guy's life is so easy. It's so, again, paved with gold. And so that was the moment in which I realized I needed to come out. And it was terrifying. I remember calling my co-founder at the time. I said, this is what I'm going to do, but I need your support because this affects all of us. This is going to affect the company. This is going to, everything. And he was 100% supportive of it. And I remember making a joke with him. I was like, dude, I'm about to commit career suicide. So I really hope this company works out. Because back then it still was kind of how it felt, right? Like nobody would want to touch this person. And so that night I called an all employee meeting. I did not want my employees hearing this on LinkedIn. I wanted them to hear it from me directly. The support I got was insane. I really didn't expect it. I really, not at the level. The messages that I got that night from all of these employees who were just so supportive and so beautiful about the whole thing. And so the next morning, I put out the post, which is still pinned to the top of my feature section on LinkedIn 3 years later, that was titled, "This is what bipolar looks like." And it was 3 photos of me, one as a maybe like 5 or 6-year-old, one as a teenager, and one as an adult. And it was terrifying. I mean, it was terrifying. Like I was so scared because I didn't know what would happen. Right.
Right.
And as you can imagine, it was overwhelming. Like the messages I got were, it was kind of difficult for me. Like I had people who were like, "You're a hero." And I was like, "No, I'm not." Please don't use that word to describe me ever again. Because I'm not. I'm just a normal person, right? There's nothing, I don't mean this in a bad way, but I just mean like I'm not any different than anybody else walking down the street, right?
Right.
There are things that are special about me, but I'm not special. I'm not more special. How about we put it that way?
There we go. Okay.
So yeah, so that would be the thing that would really end up shaping Canopy more than anything else. And it became this incredibly safe space for people to share what they needed to share. And we had 10 core values, but we had two that were number one and number two. And I talked about them ad nauseum. There are probably employees who were like, "God, will you please shut up?" Number one was transparency. And our rule was you had to be transparent with 100 people, 100% of the people in the company. And number two was vulnerability. And I used to always say that I don't expect the employees to bare their soul to the world, like apparently I'm comfortable with, but I wanted them to have their tribe. I wanted them to have their people inside of the company. The reality is there is no work-life balance. There is no work-life separation. They're fused one into the same. And it's so important, I think, for the people who are around us in our workspace to know what's going on. Again, it doesn't have to be everybody, but
Right.
we had instances of where people were struggling. They had the willingness to be vulnerable with a small group within the company. And we would see this group surround themselves with this person and take things off their plate, right? Help them with their work to allow them to have the time that they needed to deal with whatever was going on or to heal from that, right? And it was just such a beautiful thing to see. And
Yeah.
it was really the eye-opening moment of where I realized, and again, I talk about this a lot, is like it's incumbent on executives and senior leadership to create these environments. That's who's going to do it. I mean, if you're a CEO or a COO or CFO or whatever, and you're listening to this, like you sharing your struggles, right, goes such a huge way, right? I'm not talking about emotionally puking on your employees either. Let me be abundantly clear on that. What I'm talking about is this being willing to be vulnerable and share things that you've struggled with, right, opens that door for everybody else in the organization to feel that level of psychological safety of, oh, hey, I can approach these guys. I can say these things, right?
For
Like,
sure.
granted, I'm almost fortunate to be bipolar, if you will, because, well, it gives like a really heavy thing to be vulnerable about when everybody's like, oh crap, he'll talk about that. I can talk about anything, right? It is a process to start to set that stage for your employees, because that's really the only way that we're going to start getting rid of the stigma and people are going to start being able to be more open about it. Just the last thing I would share on this is that my management of my bipolar got so much better the moment I started talking about it. I started
Interesting.
having other people come into my life. I'd never, this is an interesting thing, Courtney, until that person told me they were bipolar, I had never met another bipolar person in my entire life.
Really?
Well, if you don't ever talk about a thing, how's anybody going
It's
to actually know that you have a thing?
a great point.
Right? And none
Yeah,
of us were willing to
completely.
talk about it. So none of us knew anyone. And since that point in time in which I became open about it, I started having people who DM me on LinkedIn who are still private about it. They're still in the closet. They're not comfortable with coming out yet. And I fully respect that, right? You got to live your own life. And for a lot of people, they're just not in a position professionally to be able to. But I got to talk to more people. I got a better understanding of my own condition, right? And I started learning other ways that I could manage things. And I just started seeing my life get better and better as a result of being able to openly and freely talk about it.
So powerful right there, Andrew. I mean, thinking about an employee who came to you who was so vulnerable and opened up, just exploded your own world.
Oh,
And
100%.
what happened? I have to ask, what happened to that employee?
Unfortunately, they never really ended up getting the appropriate treatment. And so I'm not sure where they are in their life and in their journey now. My hope and my prayers are that they've figured out what their management needs to look like and they're living the best life that they can. But they actually would end up kind of vanishing on us after the fact. So I wish I had a better ending to that person's journey, and their journey's still going on. So hopefully time takes time, but hopefully they know what a major impact they ended up having on me and how it changed the entire course of how I operate in my personal life. But more importantly, like it totally upended how I approach leadership within an organization. And culture became like my favorite thing. Like that was like all of a sudden I didn't know or realize. And it was like, oh my God, how can we? Because we were 130 people in 25 different states with no brick and mortar, right?
Like within 2 years, right?
Yeah.
Or,
So
I mean, you
we're all
exploded.
remote. And so it was like I was like all of a sudden like obsessed with like, how do I build great culture with 130 people living in 130 different places, right? Who never physically interact with each other. So yeah,
Okay,
it was
so
really
how did you
cool.
do that? How did you do that with everybody?
So I took a long time to explain all of it, so I'll try to do it at a high level, but over communicating was a big part of it. So we had all employee meetings online once a week. Didn't matter. Sometimes they lasted 5 minutes, sometimes they lasted 45 minutes.
Okay.
Even if we had nothing to say, I wanted all of senior leadership to say that they had nothing to say so that people heard that.
Right.
The next thing we did was called industry night, and it was optional for people, but I would bring in someone from an industry who had succeeded significantly to tell their story, because I wanted my employees to see other people who had succeeded and what their journey looked like. Too often we look at where a person is at today and we forget the grind of decades that it took them to get to that point. We had a lot of employees like in their 20s. And so it was really important to me that they be able to see that path. And then the last thing I think that was huge was we did a lunch Q&A every Thursday. If you were an executive or senior manager, you had to host one with 5 employees in the company. Now, our head of people was the one who scheduled all of it. But basically, I think it turned out that like you would be able to talk to an executive once every 6 weeks with a very intimate sort of situation. And it was their time to tell us what they thought. And it was really interesting because in the beginning, it was very active. And we got a couple of months in and like, I would have people like not show up to it or like have no questions to ask me. And so
they were afraid of you.
No, it wasn't.
Oh,
No,
okay.
It was really, really fascinating. We sent out a survey to kind of figure out, like, do you guys still want to do this? Like,
Right.
and the overwhelming response was, lately I haven't had anything to share, but I just love knowing that I always have access to share. So
Wow. Yeah.
I think leaders get scared about like opening that door super wide because they think they're going to get inundated. I found that it was the exact opposite. Don't get me wrong. In the beginning, like there was like a million different ideas, but we were able to respond to each one of those ideas and go, hey, you know what? That's an awesome idea. It's going to cost me $250,000 and we don't have $250,000 to spend right now. Right. Like just be open and transparent. That's all people like. All they want is transparency from their leadership. And the more transparency you give, guess what happens? You get way fewer questions and way fewer complaints because now they're like, oh, I understand the vision. I understand where the ball's moving. I don't need to bug them as much. But I just love knowing the safety that if I ever want to approach Andrew with an idea, I can approach Andrew with an idea.
Right. And so to reiterate, from a leadership standpoint, it has to come from the CEO, in your opinion, or top leadership.
I do. There's some people who will argue my point on this one, and I get it that you can build culture from bottom up, and there's a little bit of truth in that. But the reality is like if the CEO does it, they can, like the CEO is driving the bus. That's what I always say, right? Like they may not be doing all the things and they're blocking and tackling for people. But at the end of the day, like if you're a CEO of a company, you have the ability to change your culture. Period. Stop. The end. Your line level employee, I don't know. I don't want to say no, but like that's a slog, right? Like that's going to take a long time and you're fighting an uphill battle. Whereas
it's exhausting.
at the CEO level, they can, or somewhere else, maybe the COO would be another place where it could possibly sort of start and change. But yeah, I think it's really at that executive level.
I agree with you. I find that I think we've all been in scenarios where we've been in a culture that's been a little bit of a struggle and we've tried to change it, but it's a slog. Like you said, it is an uphill battle and it's exhausting for many.
Yeah.
So, okay, Andrew, I could keep talking to you all day,
Likewise.
but our time is coming to an end. And there's one big question, and take your time answering this. And I mean that because I love everything you're saying.
I'm a true Sagittarius.
Like me, I know, right? You've already had me in tears today. And so, what would you tell your 18-year-old self if you could go back today?
Absolutely nothing, because there's no way he would actually listen. No, I'm kidding.
So if he would listen.
I think it's a very simplistic answer. I would just want him to know that like it's going to be okay. It's been a long road. Like I won't lie.
Yeah.
Like it has been a very bumpy, rocky. There are so many things I've done that I'm not proud of as a result of the unmanaged bipolar. I'm really grateful for where that road has taken me. I wouldn't change anything about it. So I think the only thing I'd want him to know is that like it's going to be okay, because I need him to make the mistakes
Yeah.
that he's going to make to get me to where I am today. And I feel so grateful and blessed that I can do what I do today, and that hopefully I can move the needle just a little bit. And so, yeah, his entire journey needs to stay the same.
Wow. Andrew, you got me again. Something so simple, yet so powerful. It's going to be okay. And I didn't know half of what you shared with me today. And it really brings to the surface your statement of being an empathetic builder of things that matter. Your ability to put yourself out there and voice trying to normalize bipolar is helping so many people. I've had someone close to me experience it as well. And it's a scary thing for many people. And how do you share that with others? So I'm glad you're an advocate for them. And so they know they're going to be okay. You're an example of it's going to be okay. You have achieved so much. You're an inspiration, Andrew DeGood. And I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm glad to be connected to you, even though you are a Hoosier.
I'm a Floridian, damn
it. You're a Hoosier now. But thank you for your time today and being with
it.
me and being vulnerable and honest. I'm taking away so much from our conversation.
Thank you, Courtney. I really appreciate it. I always love chatting with you.
You are so welcome. So to our audience, I want you to go away, be bold, be confident, and be you. And